All right, guys, welcome back to the garage. So looks like spring is trying to make a move, so let's get some work done on the charger. All right, you can see here, got a bit of a coolant leak. Pretty sure it's the water pump. So let me get this intake off and we take a closer look. Well, it's the timing cover. I can see moisture right back there between the seam of the timing cover and the block. So this just became much more work. Now, lucky for me, I went ahead and ordered a timing cover when I ordered the water pump. So I already got the part. It's just gonna be a lot more work to get that off and replaced, so let's get to it. All right, like I said, I got my water pump. When I ordered that, I went ahead and ordered a timing cover gasket just in case. I've had situations where the timing cover would leak when the engine's cold, and then once it warmed up, it would seal. So I already had a feeling it might be the timing cover, considering the leak started when it got cold out, and the car was just sitting, not even being driven, and it started leaking. So went and got that with my Gates water pump. In typical car guy fashion, I didn't stop there. Might as well do a thermostat. Got a 180 thermostat. If I have any problems with that, I'll just switch to the 797 performance restrictor plates. A lot of guys complain about 180 stats, but I've never had an issue with the Motorad 180, so we'll see. And then I figured if I'm draining the coolant, might as well do a new coolant reservoir. And if I'm going that far, why not a new radiator? So this is just a no-name brand off eBay. They're pretty much all the same, the cheap ones. But I went with the dual row, so it's got 2 rows of fins in there. The core on this one's about 1/2 inch thicker than the stock one in my car. I believe my car has a severe duty 1. So this is thicker, like the severe duty 2 that come in the SRT8 cars. This one also has SRT8 sized inlet and outlet, so I went ahead and got SRT8 hoses. Now, the RT hose would probably fit on the lower port, but this one's definitely bigger. I've seen RT guys use their stock hoses and stretch it over the inlet, but I figure we're doing it, might as well just get the new hoses. That way it all fits like it should. So there's my new parts. Let's get started. Now, the worst thing about doing the timing cover is pulling the dampener off the crank pulley. That's gonna be the most pain. But we're already changing the radiator, so might as well just pull the radiator and fans out and possibly try to swing the condenser out of the way so we can get a puller on that crank pulley. But other than that, belt has to come off. AC compressor needs unbolted. It can just stay down there. And the lovely alternator, which is also another pain. We need to disconnect that and it can just stay there. And yeah, first thing, drain the coolant, pop the hoses off and start removing stuff. Okay, here's the drain for the radiator. It's on the passenger side. Usually you got a little hose coming off of here that comes through the lower radiator support, but mine's missing, so probably gonna make a mess. Okay, I just got it cracked and it's draining. I'm gonna go up there and remove the radiator cap and it's gonna start pouring. There it goes. All right, next we're gonna remove the serpentine belt. Just need a 3/8 ratchet right there on that little square. And you can release the tension on the belt and pull the belt off. Okay, next up, we're gonna remove this upper radiator hose. Went ahead and removed the thermostat housing because this hose was stuck on there, so just 213s, have to take it off anyway. Okay, next I'm going to attempt to pull the fans out. It's just two 10 millimeters on each side, and then the main harness. Should be able to pull those bolts and slide it out of here. Okay, next up we got to remove this coolant pipe. All you have to do is remove this tin and pop it out of the water pump, and we should be able to pull this out, and this will just be hanging out here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pull the tensioner off and then the idler pulley off just to get them out of the way. You could leave them on the pump if you wanted to. They'll both be 15 millimeter bolts. Okay, here's where we're at. We got the serpentine belt off, idler pulley, tensioner off, coolant pipe bolt loose, so that's loose. I unplugged the coolant temp sensor from back there. We need to do cam sensor, unplug that. Both radiator hoses are off. I was going to leave the water pump connected to the timing cover and just pull it off as one unit. I'm just worried this is going to be a pain in the butt to deal with, so I don't know, we'll see what happens. But we got a 15 up here for the alternator and two 15s at the bottom. We can leave the electrical connections connected. We're just going to sit it off to the side. Just make sure that the cap is on your alternator that covers the positive wire, so you're not arcing off stuff. And then AC compressor, you got a 15 here and then a couple more at the bottom. Again, we'll leave everything connected and just sit it down there out of the way, just so it's not bolted to the timing cover assembly. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and pull the water pump separately from the timing cover, just in case you guys are just doing the water pump. So what I got here is just a little template so I know where all my bolts go. So when you take your bolt out, stick it in there. That way when you go to put it back on, you know exactly where it goes. I see guys on the Facebook pages all the time asking, does anybody know where my bolts go? This is how you do it. Okay, it's just a bunch of 13s, except for this one stud here. I believe that's a 15. I'm just gonna knock them all out and put them in my template, get this water pump off. Okay, got all my bolts out in my template. So now I just need to pop this thing off. It's gonna be kind of stuck usually, so maybe a pry bar somewhere just to get it separated. And you can see right down there with the outlet, and you can pry on it right there. Just like that. It's already separated, so it should pull right off. All right, water pump's off. I'm gonna go ahead and do this upper bolt for the alternator, this upper bolt for the AC condenser down there while this drains. That way it has plenty of time to leak and I can clean all that mess up, because we'll have to go under the car to do the other two for that and the other bolts for the compressor. And then we're gonna pull the radiator out from the bottom. Okay, I got the 4 bolts out of the AC compressor. There's one there, one there, one there, and one there. And now it's loose. We just let that hang out right there. Now to do the alternator. All right, I got the last 2 alternator bolts. They were not fun. They're pretty tight. So now this can just sit off to the side. It's not connected to the timing cover anymore. Now we can do the radiator. So up there, get those 2 bolts there, and the same thing on their side, and this whole support will fall. And we can pull the radiator out, and we'll just have to make sure that the condenser kind of just stays up there. We might bungee cord it up there or something. Okay, I got the bolts removed on that side of the lower radiator support, and I still have one left over here. Before I drop it, I got some bungees here. Bungee there, holding the radiator assembly up so that I can remove that lower support and everything won't fall. Because once we get that down, we'll have to lower the radiator down and remove the condenser bolts, and they're on the front side. So we'll have to lower this down carefully. Should be enough slack in the lines for the AC for this whole thing to swing down there, and we can remove the 4 bolts for the condenser, separating the condenser from the radiator. All right, lower radiator support is out, and you see I got the whole assembly hanging there with my bungee cords. And on each side, there's gonna be a 10mm here and one right up there. And we can remove both of these, and the radiator will separate from the condenser, and the condenser can stay up there, and we can pull the radiator out. Okay, I got my bungees unhooked. Condenser is separated from the radiator. Oh, well, there we go. We're just gonna let this hang just like this, because we gotta get that crate pulley off, and we're gonna need all the room for the puller. Okay, crate pulley's out. My little impact took it right out, no big deal. But now we need to pull this off. All right, got my 3-jaw puller on here. One thing to note, do not pull on this outside ring. The dampener is actually 2 pieces separated by rubber. So if you pull on this outer ring, you could separate it from the inner. So pull on the inside, 3-jaw puller. Okay, now that the crank pulley is off, we can remove our timing cover bolts. And then don't forget the oil pan bolts. There's a few bolts that have to come out that connect the oil pan to the timing cover. Now, obviously, if you're just doing the water pump, you wouldn't be this far. You wouldn't have to remove the alternator. You wouldn't have to remove the AC condenser or the dampener. Just remove the water pump, clean your surface up, make sure you replace this O-ring, put your new water pump on, and you're done. But not the case here because I have the leak back there, so I got to pull the whole timing cover. Okay, here are the oil pan mounting bolts. You got 1 on each side and then 3 across the front. And let me knock those out real quick and we'll go do the main bolts up top. And once again, I made a little template so I can mark where my bolts go. That way I can take the bolts out, throw them in there, and I know exactly where to put them back. And these bolts are 13s. Again, use a pry bar just like the water pump and just slowly work it off. Try not to force it. I just want to mention there is a water pipe right there that's inserted into the back of the timing cover. It could be stuck, so I might try to stick a little screwdriver down there and then free it up. That way the timing cover comes off. All right, and right here's where it was leaking. You see that gasket has all kinds of corrosion on it, and it was dripping down the timing cover, down to the oil pan. And that's where my leak was. That gasket, nasty. Even on this one, a lot of corrosion on that side of the gasket too, so it was only a matter of time before it needed replaced anyway. Now to get this cleaned up. And here's the other water pipe I was talking about. It goes into the back of the timing cover, so that might give you a little bit of problems. We'll replace this O-ring as well as this one when we put everything back together, but I went ahead and got the surface cleaned up pretty good. It's just an O-ring seal there, so there shouldn't be any silicone except for down there in the corners where the timing cover, block, and oil pan meet. We'll put a little bit of silicone right down that seam when we put everything back together. As far as cleaning the surface, just some brake clean and the red Scotch-Brite went over it. Cleaned it up. Obviously, anytime you take the timing cover off, plan on doing an oil change just in case anything falls down in there. You want to drain the oil and put fresh oil in. So let me get that timing cover cleaned up so we can get this back together. Now, I don't know about you guys, but my favorite part about wrenching on cars is putting new parts on cars, but also cleaning up old parts so they look better than what they did than when I took them off. So I already showed you the water pump, timing cover, gasket, coolant reservoir, radiator, new hoses, new thermostat. But also cleaned and painted the water neck, cleaned up and painted the lower radiator support, cleaned up and painted the crank pulley, also cleaned up all my hardware for everything. And believe it or not, I cleaned the timing cover, but obviously if you know anything about corroded aluminum, it is a pain to clean, but it's better than what it was. So also cleaned up the fans, got my coolant, G05 is what you want for 06 to 10 cars. Got my oil change ready. Let's start putting stuff back together. Okay, let's get this gasket in. Just want to make sure it's fully seated inside the timing cover. I like to loosely fit it first, and then just go back through and press it down. That way you're not stretching it. Now technically, you could replace the crank seal. Mine showed no signs of leaking, plus I just didn't order one, so we're gonna rock it and hopefully it still doesn't leak. Got my cam sensor, I'm gonna throw that back in. Just gonna lube the O-ring up with a little oil. There we go. Throw my bolt back in. Okay, I got a little RTV there in the seam there. Same thing over there. I went ahead and added some to the gasket surface there on either side. Where this gasket is recessed into the timing cover is where you want that RTV, just so it seals. Okay, I put a new O-ring on my water pipe. It was definitely needed. The old one broke as soon as I pulled it off. You might fight with the water pump to get it seated in there, and then the alternator, it might be in the way, so just keep an eye on that. But we got it on there, just need to start throwing in some bolts. Got my bolts here, got them all cleaned up. Let's go. Now I'm just gonna start slowly snugging these down evenly. Don't crank on them until we get under there and do the oil pan bolts also. Now another thing I like to do is take one of the water pump bolts that pass through the timing cover and put a little spacer on it. And I'm just gonna snug this one up also, just to seat the whole timing cover, not just the bottom side. Okay, there we go, snug down, and let's go do the oil pan bolts. All right, got my oil pan bolts snugged up. Now they're just snug, they're not torqued or anything. I'm gonna go up and torque the top bolts, the main bolts, and then I'll come back under here and torque those. Man, I cannot wait to drop this cradle and clean it up and repaint it. I got all new suspension to go in, got front Brembos to go in, so that's gonna be probably next. All right, got all my bolts torqued. These 13s up here are 250 inch-pounds, and then the oil pan bolts down there, this 10 millimeters, are 9 foot-pounds. So now I think I'm gonna bolt the alternator back on and the AC compressor back on. Alternator bolted back on, compressor bolted back on. Don't forget to plug in your cam sensor. And I think we'll put the dampener on. Okay, I got my crank pulley just sitting on the snout with the crank. I got my bolt ready. I put a little oil between the head of the bolt and the washer, just to allow it to torque easy. Now you're not gonna be able to use this bolt to pull the crank on. You're gonna need a longer bolt or the actual tool to get that on there. So I just have the same thread bolt with the spacer, and we're gonna see if this will pull it on. So I had to give it a few taps around here, just lightly, just to get it started on the crank. Very light taps around it, just to make sure I had plenty of thread engagement into the crank. You don't want a couple threads, you want more than that. Obviously, this is not the correct way to do this. You would have the correct tool to pull it on. And we're gonna go nice and slow and make sure the crank's moving as we tighten the bolt. Okay. Now I want to see how far the stock bolt threads in there. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get this torque down, 129 foot-pounds. All right, I think I'm gonna go ahead and throw the radiator in and the fans, just because I have more room before I put the water pump in. Now, one thing I don't like is you can't use the factory air deflectors from the radiator. There's just nowhere for it to snap onto on the top or bottom. Basically, all these do is focus the air through the radiator once it comes through the condenser, so that air can't go out the sides as it comes through. You can see here, there's the flap right there. So we'll see how it does. Hopefully it does fine. All right, I got 3 of the 4 condenser bolts in. You can see this one is not lining up. Now, I don't think it's the fault of the radiator. If you can see, the condenser is actually warped, and I think that's pushing this bracket out. So I'm just going to try to take a screwdriver in here and bend it back. That way it lines up. And I was able to get it in. Well, I actually had to enlarge the hole just to make that bolt fit. And I don't, like I said, I don't think it's the radiator's fault. I think it's the condenser. See how tweaked that thing is? It's flaring out on this side, not allowing that hole to line up. But we got it. All right, I got it almost up. Just like last time, I got bungees just helping it sit up there. That way I can go down there and put the lower radiator support up. I got my bolts and brand new lower isolators because my other ones are trashed. All right, it fits. Got the bolts in, new isolators. Looks nice that it's freshly painted. Now if the rest of the car look like that. Now when you're putting the radiator up, you want to make sure the notch sits inside this rubber mount up here and not off to the side. If so, you can always loosen this bolt, reposition the upper mount and slide it back down on the radiator and tighten that bolt. Now also, if you have the factory power steering cooler, make sure you get your line inside that little bracket just to hold it so it doesn't rub on anything. Okay, fans are in. I did have to do one thing. In order to get it to sit right and get the bolts in, I had to widen these little slots that the fan sits in. They were a little too tight. Opening them up allowed the fan to sit a little lower and get those two bolts in. Okay, water pump time, finally. I'm just gonna put this gasket in here just like we did the timing cover, same kind of gasket. Push it in lightly all the way around, that way you're not stretching it, and then press it down into the seal. And then we throw this on. All right, got all the water pump bolts torqued, 20 foot-pounds. Also got my bolt back in for the water pipe. And I had unplugged the coolant temp sensor just to give me more room for this pipe to move. So I got that plugged back in. Now let's put the lower radiator hose back in. Now, unfortunately, I did not get the right hose clamps for the SRT style hose. So I got some T-bolt clamps. I'm just gonna use those. They should work just fine. And the lower hose is on. Let's get this idler pulley on. And then the tensioner. And both of those get torqued to 40 foot-pounds. Now let's get the belt on. Then we'll do our thermostat housing, and upper hose. And just like that, the belt is on. Okay, we got our thermostat housing, thermostat, bolts. Only thing to pay attention to is that little bleeder. That needs to be at the 12 o'clock position when you insert it. This side goes in the water pump. So just like this, have that facing up, just like that. Make sure it's seated in there. I'm gonna put this on with our bolts. Okay, now that this is done, torque these bolts to 112 inch-pounds. Now we can put our upper hose on. And the upper hose is on. Unfortunately, I had to use gear clamps on here. I just didn't have the right size hose clamps, and the factory clamp that was here did not fit. It was not big enough. So, especially down here, that one's SRT specific size, but my RT one did not fit on this hose. So, gear clamps it is. Now let's replace this and we can start filling the coolant. Now I did want to mention, you may have noticed I've had the car jacked up this entire time, and I did that for a reason. It's going to make bleeding the coolant way easier. Regardless of if I was dropping the radiator or not, I would have had the car jacked up before I started draining coolant. That way, all the air goes towards the front and the coolant sits in the back. That way you don't get air pockets back in the heater core and the back of the block. So I've done this many times this way. It's always worked, never had a problem bleeding the coolant this way. Okay, just got the oil change. Now it's time to fill the coolant. Now, like I said, I've had the front end of the car jacked up this entire time. That makes this area the high point. So all the coolant will flow to the back and no air gets to the back. This was gonna make bleeding easier. The drawback is it sucks bending over the car to work on it. But when it comes to bleeding the coolant, this makes it super simple. So just got the bleeder screw out and we're just gonna start filling the coolant. And once it starts running out of here, we'll put the screw back in and that'll be it. And we'll heat cycle the car. And if it drains any, we'll just add to it later. But that should get the system full of coolant to the most part, except for maybe just a little bit of air, but it'll work its way out. There she goes. Put your plug back in. Just got to top off the coolant and we're good. All right, everything is back together. Only thing left to do now is start it up and pray we have no leaks. All right, let's get this thing started up and see how she sounds. All right, I've had it sitting here idling for a while. That's where the gauge is reading. Let's go check to see if that thermostat opened. Oh yeah, she's open. So far, no leaks. Everything looks good, everything sounds good. Might have to top off the coolant later, but I'm calling it good. All right, well, that's a wrap on this one. Got a lot done in this video, a lot of cooling stuff, so hopefully help keep that HEMI cool. Now, I want to mention the 180 stat. It does nothing unless you adjust your fan settings. I like to use the HHP recommended settings for the 180 thermostat. I've always had good luck with those settings, but again, if you just throw the 180 in there, don't change your fan settings, it's not going to do anything. Also, when it comes to the radiator, I mentioned the one I put in it is a dual row. So what that means is there's actually 2 rows of these tubes next to each other going across the radiator, whereas this one is just one single tube from front to back. The aluminum one I just put in is 2 rows. So there's a row and then another row right next to each other. Now you can go with 3-row or 4-row radiators. What I found was a lot of the cheap no-name radiators, even if you went to a 3-row or 4-row, the core stayed the same. So what that means is the more rows you add without expanding the core, the smaller the tubes become. So yeah, a 3-row or 4-row does sound better, but unless you're enlarging the core, you're actually going to make it a less efficient radiator. That's why I went with the dual row, just because I knew adding more rows to the same size core is not going to help cooling. Now, obviously, if you go with the name brand, most likely the more rows you have, the thicker the core is. You may run into fitment issues when you go to put it in the car, just due to a thicker core size. So that's why I went with the dual row. I knew that the dimensions were going to be similar to the SRT8 radiator, which is severe duty 2. So I knew that I should be able to fit it in the car, no problem. But that'll wrap it up. Hope you guys enjoyed watching. I got a lot more planned for the car. I got a bunch of suspension stuff to do up front, Brembos to do, power steering upgrades, all kinds of stuff. So subscribe if you haven't. Appreciate you guys for watching and check you on the next one.